In this lesson, we'll discuss ways to create high poly objects without necessarily using TurboSmooth. Alright, so I just wanted to kind of break out of using TurboSmooth all the time. I don't want you to get the impression that high poly modeling includes TurboSmooth all the time. Okay, so let's talk about some different ways of doing this. Well, if you really think about it, if you add enough segments to an object, we can make it look high poly. We can make it look extremely smooth. It's just that TurboSmooth makes things a little bit easier in that process. Now, we have other modeling tools. We can model with splines. We can create high poly objects that way. We can create models using patches. Patches are not polygons. They are pieces of geometry that are very, very smooth. They're created using segments and splines, and can be very smooth, okay, and to give you that look of high poly. So let's go ahead and just take a look at one of these ways. We're going to create the drawstring, okay, that is attached to the handle here. So to get started with this, let's go ahead and go to our shapes and our line tool. In my top view, hitting T on the keyboard, I'm going to come right up here over the top here, and I'm just going to turn off auto grid, and I'm going to left click and drag a point out. Okay, let's hold down shift to constrain that to straight out, and then I'm going to bring it out to this point, and then kind of out to here. What we're doing is we're just creating a rectangle, basically. If I hit F3, I could probably connect it right up in here, but I don't want to do that just yet. Let's go hold down shift, and let's come up to this point, and then we'll come out, and then we're going to end right where we started. So left click on that, close the spline, and hit yes. So now we can go to vertex mode, and we can start to shape this out a little bit. Okay, now what am I doing with this? Why did I use a spline? Well, a spline can be used to create things like string and wires and rope, all kinds of different objects like this, because all we have to do is really create the path, and then we use the lines interpolation methods to smooth it out and to make it higher poly. So I'm going to select all the vertices in this. I'm going to right click, and I'm going to change everything to Bezier corner. I'm going to start moving these vertices around and really starting to smooth out this shape. Now, this is going to be the string that goes through the hole, so you want to make sure that whenever you move these handles around, that that you're still getting that line to go through that hole there. Okay, so let's pull that out there, and let's get this to fit. Okay, and then I'm just going to start taking this line in a different direction. Now, the great thing about using a line is we have the ability to come in and modify it, okay, if we really want to. So if you followed along with the last level, we worked with splines a little bit, and we learned how to create straps, which was very, very flexible, which allowed us to reuse that object quite a bit. We used what was called the loft object, okay, and the path was very flexible, and that's kind of what we want here. So now that I have this smoothed out, I'm going to come in and I'm going to actually grab all of these, right click and switch them to Bezier to make sure that it's a very smooth line, and then we can come in and we can make some very quick changes to this. So let's say that I want to bring these points in a little bit. Okay, create something kind of along these lines. Okay, so now let's hit F3, go back to our wireframe, let's turn off vertex mode and pull that up, and just get that centered in that hole. And then I can go back to vertex mode, and I can start to pull these down and have this as if it's like resting on the floor, or something like that. So okay, so now that we have this generated here, let me pull that out some, let's make that a little bit wider. So now that we have our line in place, how do we make this a high poly object? Well, first off, we need to get geometry on this object. And we could use loft if we want, but we don't even really have to go that far with the lines. We can turn off vertex mode. We go to rendering. And we want to enable this line in the renderer and then also in our viewport. And you'll notice that it creates geometry along that line. We can adjust the radius of this. And so if I push that up, you'll notice that we get a little bit more of a thickness, okay, to our string. And we've got a nice little thickness. I want to make that a little bit thicker there. And then I'll pull that straight up just to make sure that that stays centered in that object. Okay, a little bit more. That looks good. But you'll notice that it's pretty angular. Okay, it's very jagged. It doesn't give us a good look here. So what we want to do is we want to adjust the smoothness of this object. Now we can adjust the sides. The sides I think are fine. We could probably just left that down at like 12. But let's leave it at 16. I think that's a good value. The interpolation is what's going to give us enough path steps for this to work. So if we adjust this, you'll notice that we're getting smoother and smoother in all these directions. So we'll take that up to like 20. And let's change this from that blue to black and then apply our material. And you'll see that we've just made a very high poly string. It's very, very smooth, easy to work with. Okay, it looks really good. Okay, and that was all without using TurboSmooth. That wasn't absolutely necessary. Now looking at this, whenever you are creating objects like this, you might get a bunch of polygons that are very small and some that are a little larger. And the reason for that is because of the handle difference here. So we might want to move this handle around a little bit. So I might want to take this and push it in, give it a little bit of a different angle. Okay. Might pull this one out. Okay, and try to get those polygons to kind of alleviate a little bit more. Okay, but all in all, pretty good look. Okay, still makes it look high poly. Just wanted to show you, you don't always have to have TurboSmooth. So at this point, we're getting down to the very end. And at this point, what I want you to do is I want you to make any final changes in the shape to your blade or to your handle that you want to make. For me, I want to make a quick change to my handle. These vertices right here at the top, I just want to pull those over, okay, a little bit, just to change the overall shape of this. And let me turn on my constraint. So Control 2, let me constrain that to the edge. Pull that up there. Okay, let me do the same thing here. Okay, and turn on TurboSmooth just to kind of change the shape of that, make it a little more interesting. Okay, so make those changes that you want to. You might want to try to experiment with it a little bit more. But we're getting down to the absolute very end of this. And now what we want to do is we want to create the grips to this. So I want to create some very small circular grips that can just really looks like you can grab a hold of that. You would be able to swing it as hard as you can. It wouldn't fly out of your hands or something like that. So in the next lesson, we're going to talk about how to tackle something like that, as we don't have a lot of geometry here. And I think extruding from this geometry might create some problems. So we'll talk about how to use what's called floating geometry to create fine details like that. So I'll see you in the next lesson.